Sometimes we talk in the abortion debates about viability, as if a newborn infant is viable. A newborn infant is not viable. The newborn infant is completely dependent on his or her mother. And the point that this cognitive scientist was making is that it is agapic love that parents pour into their children and turn them into adults. And you all know this. This baby comes home. This baby needs to nurse. But the baby doesn't just need food. I mean, Edie will tell you, she majors in this stuff. The baby needs contact with its mother. The baby needs eye contact. The baby needs to have the mother talk to the baby. A big question in psychology was, how do people learn to talk? It's an amazing thing. You can find somebody with low IQ, but you know what they're able to do? They're able to speak. A chimp can't speak. A dolphin can't speak, not like us. Children, even mentally disabled children, learn to talk. How do they talk? And so this Russian scientist studied this and said, you know what? Parents automatically reduce their language to a level just a little above the baby.
Labeled as the stagnation phase. This is when the most notable events occurred, and they eerily mirrored Calhoun's rat experiments. In a natural setting, those mice which find no social niche will leave the colony, but in this experiment, emigration was impossible, and so those forced to remain withdrew from society. These dejected males formed a large pool in the center of the enclosure. They quickly became characterized by both their inactivity and their many scars and wounds. Occasionally, they would grow agitated and attack one another, and with nowhere to retreat, the recipient of these attacks would simply lay still and endure the assault. The outcast females, rather than joining them, would retreat to the highest apartments and live quietly among one another. It was during this time that the behavioral sink manifested, with mice gathering around specific food hoppers in large numbers, while others remained almost entirely untouched, showing how, again, the need for social interaction had become so intertwined with the need for food that the former had overtaken the latter. The males who had won the initial fights also were placed under extreme stress. As more and more mice reached maturity from within and without, the leaders of the social groups continually had to patrol and defend their territory. Eventually, they reached the point of exhaustion and could not defend the females within their group. These females were therefore forced to defend the nest themselves, even when nursing their young, leading to generalized aggressive behavior. This aggression would inevitably be misdirected onto their young, who would be wounded by their mothers and forced to leave the nest before they were finished weaning. Much like the rats, the mother mice would also forget some of their young when moving from one nesting site to another. Due to the added stress of defending their territory, sometimes the mothers would reabsorb unborn mice in the womb, further reducing the fertility rates. Calhoun writes, "For all practical purposes, there had been a death of societal organization by the end of Phase C. Finally, there was Phase D, which Calhoun entitled the Death Phase. This phase was characterized largely by an entire generation of young who had been rejected by their mothers early and forced to leave the nest, and they were therefore unable to exhibit normal social behavior. This manifested in numerous ways. The females of this generation had far fewer children, and those that did have children lacked the maternal instincts necessary to raise them beyond weaning." Calhoun goes on to describe the males of this generation. Quote, "Male counterparts to these non-reproducing females were soon dubbed the beautiful ones. They never engaged in sexual approaches toward females, and they never engaged in fighting, and so they had no wound or scar tissue. Thus, their pelage remained in excellent condition. Their behavioral repertoire became largely confined to eating, drinking, sleeping, and grooming, none of which carried any social implications beyond that represented by contiguity of bodies." Unquote. As the last mice with reproductive instincts aged beyond their fertility, Calhoun declared that the last male would die around day 1780 of the experiment,